Okay, so let's take a look at this case study. Martha Stewart, domestic icon. She used to be really, really big back in the early 2000s, but most of us still maybe know her name, yes? Okay. Famous homemaker, known for a brand that includes a TV show, magazine, and home goods products. She was convicted in 2004 of conspiracy and obstruction of justice through an investigation into her sale of shares of Imclone Systems. Imclone Systems is a company that was founded in 1989, publicly traded. They were an integrated global biopharmaceutical company aimed at developing biological treatments for cancer. The CEO was Sam Waxel. Peter Bukanovic was also a key player in this scandal. He was a Merrill Lynch trader who worked for Stewart when the trading scandal emerged. Douglas Fanoyle was a Merrill Lynch employee who was instructed by Bukanovic to inform Stewart about the upcoming decline in Imclone stock. Okay, the scandal itself occurred in late 2001. So basically, the founder and CEO was informed of the FDA's denial of their drug line, Erbitux. Okay, so obviously this is really negative information. Once it becomes public, these shares are likely to tank in the aftermath of this information. The CEO then informed his daughter, and she sold her shares. He also informed his father, he sold his shares. And Bukanovic instructed Fanoyle to inform Stewart that Waxel and his daughter were selling all the Imclone stock in their Merrill Lynch accounts. Sorry, this is all shaking. I'm not sure what exactly is going on there. Stewart owned about 4,000 shares of Imclone, and she sold her stake on December 27th. On December 28th, the knowledge became public when the FDA made its decision public, and the company's stock dropped 18% when the FDA announced the rejection of Imclone's main drug for cancer treatment, Erbitux. Shares dropped to $45. When questioned by the SEC and FBI, Stewart claimed that she instructed Bukanovic to sell her shares if and when the price fell below $60 per share. Douglas Fanoyle pled guilty to being paid off and pressured by Bukanovic to keep quiet about Stewart's stock trade. Prosecution also stated that Stewart lied to investigators during their investigation about her innocence. She also gave a false statement about being told that the founder was selling his stock. In the end, it was demonstrated that Stewart and Bukanovic conspired to conceal that Bukanovic had provided Stewart with non-public information regarding the founding family's choice to sell their stock. Stewart got convicted of two crimes. One is obstruction of justice, which is when a person questioned in an investigation lies to the investigating officers. The other is conspiracy, an agreement between at least two people to engage in an unlawful or criminal act. And she was convicted of both of these things. To be honest, Stewart was kind of stupid. She was worth about $4 billion at this point, and selling early saved her about $65,000. I guess she thought that there was no chance of getting caught. Yeah, I mean, her empire kind of imploded when she went to prison. And that $4 billion collapsed to like $1 billion, so she ended up losing a lot of money. Most of it not because of this, but because of the conviction and the subsequent collapse in her brand image. Okay, so she saved $65,000 and lost about $3 billion. She's made a comeback recently. She's now selling weed with Snoop Dogg. I'm not joking. Look it up. She's got a special line of weed products that she and Snoop Dogg are peddling. But she's still nowhere near as big as she once was when she was the domestic icon that dominated the American public psyche in that area. Are there any questions or comments about this or about illegal insider trading in general? Okay, so if I look on page 325 of the quarterly report, the 10Q, for a particular company and find a footnote that suggests that the company's debt load is much larger than the public has been led to believe, and I trade on that information, have I engaged in illegal insider trading? No, I have not. Because it's a quarterly report, so it is publicly available. It's just on page 325 in the footnotes. Okay, so it has to be knowledge that the public cannot access, and you also have to be an insider or be privy to an insider. Okay, good deal. All right, I actually want to go to a second case study. Bear with me for just 1 minute. And, well, why don't we do it this way, actually. Let me just go ahead and put a couple concepts on the board, and then we'll get our second case study going. Okay, so to finish up the concepts from last week, the last ethical issue I wanted to cover is the price gouging issue. Price gouging is a really interesting phenomenon because people are in strong disagreement with each other about this. And so I'll just point out the moral arguments on both sides, and you can maybe decide for yourselves what you think about this. So price gouging is something that happens when one group, one counterparty, has strong asymmetric negotiating power over and against another. Okay, so you've all seen in micro, probably, the supply-demand curves that look like this, and the happy medium where they meet is where the price occurs. Okay, sometimes, unfortunately, there is much, much greater demand than there is supply. Okay, and this usually occurs temporarily, although sometimes due to logistics of things, it can sometimes be a permanent arrangement. And when it is, it can be very lucrative for companies when demand far outstrips supply. But it might occur in the aftermath of a natural disaster, or where there's been some sudden shortage of something. I know that Texas has a cap on the price of natural gas, and I believe natural gas floated up to $9,000 per kilowatt hour, which is like really, really high during the recent freeze. It's a form of price gouging, but at the same time, Texas had made provision for that in case of necessity because we chose a market-based solution to the construction of the grid and the provision of energy. Okay, now having said that, there is a case to be made in favor of price gouging. So if you think about the dynamics of things, when there's a lot more demand than there is supply for something, there is incentive for sellers to make more, okay, or for other sellers to enter the game and to themselves make part of the money that's being made as well. And so there is incentive to move back to an equilibrium between buyers and sellers. Okay, for this reason, some would argue, especially the pure free market types, they would say that price gouging is actually a market that is functioning correctly. So even if a particular product costs a ton in the immediate aftermath of a natural disaster, that is a market functioning correctly because the sellers are charging the price that the buyers are willing to pay. There just are a lot more buyers than there are sellers. Okay, maybe the cost of gasoline goes way up, or maybe the cost of bottled water goes way up in the aftermath of the natural disaster. So some would argue that what is going on in price gouging is actually just a free market that is functioning successfully. I want to show you guys a case study in this regard. And this is a real famous case study from the last several years. Let me pull it up here. Okay, you might not have heard of the company. They've actually changed their name because they got so much bad publicity over this case. The company is Valiant Pharmaceuticals. They're now Bosch Health. Okay, it's a pretty large company, biopharmaceutical company. A multinational specialty pharmaceutical and medical device company is the description on their website. Devoted to improving people's lives through their healthcare products. The company is based in Quebec in Canada. This is the former CEO. He left in the aftermath of scandal. A quick SWOT analysis, so we understand this company. 7,500 employees, lots and lots of drug lines, over 900 products. They're primarily focused on drugs in the developed world and largely dependent on America in particular for revenue generation. Threats include healthcare reforms and in the aftermath of the current recession, economic slowdown. They do still have emerging market opportunities to grow in new markets and also growth through generic and over-the-counter drugs. Additionally, as people get older in this country, there will continue to be a strong demand for new drugs over the next few decades. But let's look at the case in question. They were engaging in price gouging, and it was a notorious incident of price gouging. So Valiant's business model was that they would buy drug lines. Now, the way drug lines work in the United States is once a company develops a drug, it gets legislative protection for a certain period of time, patent protection, to exclusively provide and generate that drug. Okay, and this is done for good reasons, so that companies will be incentivized to make the drugs, because if they are immediately facing competition and generics, which can duplicate the drugs that they make, then their profits are going to plummet, and they're not going to be incentivized to put in the years of R&D and hard work and efforts to actually develop new drug lines. Okay, so drugs typically in the United States, not always, but typically, they are protected for a certain period of time. Sometimes the patent protection will be 8 years or 10 years, 5 years, 12 years. It depends on the particular drug line. But this protects the company's revenue stream for a particular period of time. Valiant was not, they were not themselves developing drugs. What they were in the business of doing, though, was purchasing other drug lines from other companies. And so they would purchase like a patent-protected drug line, and then they would own that drug for a period of time. But it was what they were doing after they purchased the drug lines that was so notorious. Okay, so they specialized in drugs for orphan diseases. And I mean by that diseases that aren't very common and for which there kind of is only one treatment or one drug that can treat the disease. Okay, so rare diseases for which there is one drug to treat the disease. And they would purchase drug lines from other companies like Cyprian and Cooperman, Glumetza and Isoprel. They would purchase drug lines from other companies, and then they would immediately increase the price. They did this because they had the customers over a barrel. Because many of these customers needed this drug in order to live, actually. Some of these diseases are pretty serious. Okay, neurological disorders, various different heart diseases. And the customers needed these particular drugs in order to survive. And Valiant knew they had their customers over a barrel, and so they knew that the customers' demand would remain relatively constant if they increased prices. So they increased prices dramatically. Some of these numbers are extraordinary, right? Cyprian was being sold for $1,400 a year when they purchased the drug line. They turned around and started selling it for $21,000. Cooperman from about $900 to $26,000. Isoprel, an average yearly dose of Isoprel was $4,500, and they were charging $37,000 for it. So they massively jacked up the price as soon as they purchased these drug lines. It was a form of price gouging. It was price gouging engaged in to take advantage of customers who would, many of whom would die or face serious illness if they didn't receive these drugs. Valiant defended itself, claiming that treatments were priced based on a range of factors, including clinical benefits and the value they bring to patients, physicians, payers, and society. The consequences were substantial. Many people could not afford to pay such high prices. Sick people were not able to pay for medicines they needed to live. Also, it turned out that company executives were making off like bandits. especially through stock options. Additionally to the price gouging issue, the company has also faced allegations of improper accounting and the charge that it used these predatory price hikes to boost growth. We can look at a couple of other examples of price gouging just for comparison before we consider the ethics of the Valiant case. Price gouging is especially common when customers are in distress. For instance, after Hurricane Katrina, a Florida man was charged with price gouging after renting a truck to drive up to North Carolina. The man bought 35 generators and then brought them home and sold them for almost double what he bought them for. Price gouging is common during disasters. Okay, here's a gas station that raised their prices. Here's one well-known case of price gouging that kind of became locally famous. In late 2008, Muhammad Manan offered gasoline for sale at his Tulsa, Oklahoma gas station for $3.29. He had raised the price from $2.69, an increase of 60 cents following a December 2008 ice storm. Under Oklahoma law, once an emergency has been declared, business owners cannot artificially raise the price of necessary goods and services more than 10% above the pre-emergency price. Based on the pre-emergency price, $2.69, the maximum increase allowed by law once the declaration was issued was 26 cents. Okay, now there are definitely arguments against price gouging. Okay, let's look at some of them. Price gouging, it could be argued, exploits poor, needy, and suffering persons, like the people who were on the receiving end of Valiant's price gouging policies. Think here of people with rare, debilitating diseases. And the argument could be made that when people are most in need of help, it is unethical to charge them more just because you know they are in need. After all, the last thing you should be doing as a business person is reaping a short-term economic advantage at the expense of your ethical values and long-term business success. People remember if you price gouged, right? If you're the gas station that price gouged after the natural disaster, they're going to retaliate once the supply-demand curve has shifted more towards equilibrium. There are, however, arguments for price gouging, especially from pure free market circles. Consider this one. Higher prices increase supply. Consider Hurricane Harvey in Houston. If the price of generators increases enough, people from other states like Oklahoma or Louisiana will drive to Houston to sell their generators. Right? So it incentivizes people to increase supply when prices are that high for something. Also, here's a second argument for price gouging. Higher prices restrict demand to the most valuable uses. Some might want water because they're dying of thirst, right? Very valuable use. Others might want it to boil noodles, take a shower, or wash their clothes. Less valuable uses. As the price increases, people stop using water for frivolous things and start selling water to each other. So it ensures efficiency in the use of the resource if the resource is scarce when price is so high. So we have then some economists who see price gouging as simply an example of the laws of supply and demand working as they should. Others who see it as exploitation of needy people. And we have these two sides to things. So who's right? So I thought I would take just a minute here and ask you guys what your opinion was of the price gouging issue. Are all price gouging forms created equal? Is price gouging sometimes wrong and sometimes acceptable? Was it wrong in Valiant's case, but is it sometimes acceptable in other circumstances? What do you think?
Because there are items like once things go viral, like naked carpenters, and like the sellers will high up the price because it's such a high demand. But that's like it's a want, it's not a need. So I say it depends on the want and the need.
Good. Okay, I love this distinction that Maria has introduced. Maria says there are wants and there are needs. And maybe in circumstances where it's a luxury item or a non-necessity item, price gouging might be more justifiable. Most people, when they encounter something like the Valiant case, their initial response is like what this company was doing was way out of bounds. Why might what Valiant was doing be especially out of bounds when it comes to price gouging?
People's lives depended on that product.
Absolutely, yeah.
It probably depends on what it is and like what you said, like if it's a necessity of your life or if it's just an everyday product.
Good, yeah. People's lives depended on it, and there were structurally no ways to increase supply or to have other people come in, other companies come in and provide alternative drugs. So the company really had these people like trapped. And people died as a result of it. So I agree. I think price gouging in Valiant's case is way out of bounds and shouldn't be allowed. But at the same time, I'm also with both of you, and I think that there might be other cases where the lack of supply can incentivize people. If it's the sort of a good that can be easily moved or easily provided by enterprising people, the lack of supply can incentivize people to do such a thing. Okay, so I think I'm okay after natural disasters with really high prices for things if it's the sort of a product that can be very quickly filled from other locations, like people bringing water in or bringing generators in or something like that. I think I might be in favor of some sort of a hybrid solution here where the price is allowed to rise quite a bit, but not like astronomically, where there's like a ceiling on it, like that Oklahoma law where it can, I think maybe a little more than 10% is good. You want to incentivize sellers to go the extra mile to provide the product after all. But yeah, I think that maybe a hybrid solution might be the answer here as well. I don't know. Any other comments on the price gouging topic? The ethics of price gouging? So maybe when it comes to necessities, it's much less justifiable than when it comes to luxuries or just desires. Okay. Go ahead and grab the lights again, please, Maria. Thank you. If you'll open up your business ethics in action text, I want to say a couple things about Chapter 9. Okay, I hope everybody was able to read this Tycho case at the beginning of the chapter. What was this Kozlowski dude doing? You guys remember? You can look at the text if you need to. We're a little bit late getting to this. We're still behind by about 4 or 5 days. So if you're having trouble remembering it, just look over the text a little bit. What was this Kozlowski dude doing? So on page 199 through 201. You guys remember? He was avoiding taxes, yeah, and artwork, right? Okay. So it's like he's out of control, right? This guy was nuts. Look at all the stuff he was paying for using company money. Paid for an apartment. Excused his loans to pay for antiques, art, and other furnishings. Paid for a background check on the fiance of a Merrill Lynch analyst. Financed half of a $2.1 million trip for his wife's birthday in Sardinia, which included a performance by singer Jimmy Buffett. Okay, I don't know if Jimmy Buffett's worth see if it is worth paying that much to see him. Okay, in addition, he buys this 15,000 square foot mansion using a $19 million no-interest loan, which later was treated as a special bonus, so it became a grant. All right, and on and on. It just like goes on and on. This guy was totally out of control using corporate funds for personal use. He ends up getting convicted. Okay, and the case is listed here because in the aftermath of him, this other CEO who has to come in has to clean things up, and that's obviously a much more difficult thing to do. I want to make a couple comments here on the ethics of leadership. Okay, so that's our second point for today. Third point. Okay, Several virtues are listed here. And I just want to make a couple comments in our lecture right now on characteristics of these virtues. In all of these virtues, I guess I would take an Aristotelian line. Aristotle would have said the way to cultivate these virtues is through practice or habit. By practicing now in small ways, you get better and create in yourself the virtue so that you can manifest it in much larger ways when the time comes. For instance, this virtue on page 210 that's listed here, integrity. Integrity confers unity in making decisions coherent with a personal life project and in integrating various relationships into one's personal life. In its most genuine sense, integrity not only means coherence and unity, but also completeness or wholeness. Integrity is really hard. It's being the same person in all aspects of your life, not keeping secrets or living a double life, being one thing in one part of your life but another in another part of your life. It's really hard because there are all sorts of incentives in the short term not to do it or not to practice it. Often, if you can tell lies, you can get away with it for a while. Often, if you live a double life, you can get away with it for a while. And maybe some people do get away with it permanently. But if you do get caught, if and when you do get caught, it ends up being usually much, much worse than it would otherwise have been if you just hadn't told a lie in the first place. Okay, so integrity is really hard to practice because it almost always it needs to be manifested in circumstances where in the short term, it would actually be to your immediate benefit to deceive rather than to be truthful. I've seen that many times in business. And resisting the short-term temptation to deceive for the sake of long-term reputational benefits or for the sake of longer-term truth-telling is sometimes quite difficult to do, especially if the short-term deception path looks like it would be easiest. Humility on the next page, page 212, is a very attractive virtue in leadership. We've all seen people, athletes, celebrities who exude arrogance, and it's not a very attractive trait to see around us at all. In fact, I can't think of any trait other than arrogance that's more of a turnoff. It's incredibly unattractive in another human being. But humility is a very attractive thing, and when we manifest it, other people want to be around us and want to cooperate and to help, and to, if they are working for us and we're in a leadership position, they will want to emulate that. Humility is sometimes misunderstood, though. Sometimes humility is seen as just putting yourself down or constantly speaking poorly of yourself, but that's not really what genuine humility is. I heard it said one time, and maybe you've heard it before too, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. And a genuinely humble person just doesn't really talk about himself very much. It's not that he's always saying, I'm just a worm, pay no attention to me. Rather, it's that he doesn't really think about self. It's not like self-obsessed. And that's a very attractive trait to see in leadership. On page 213, the opposite of humility is arrogance, pride, conceit, or an excessive sense of personal worth. Arrogant managers deem themselves irreplaceable. They do not recognize their errors and rarely rectify their wrong behaviors. Neither do they acknowledge their own failures, but constantly lay the blame for them on others. I remember seeing, I guess it was MJ's Basketball Hall of Fame acceptance speech. And it was the worst thing I'd ever seen in my life. He basically went down through the list of all the people who had failed him over the years, and he called them out. It's like, and my high school coach did not give me enough playing time, but I triumphed in spite of that. And it was awful. I was like, dude, you're taking this moment to be an arrogant jackass? Now, of course, it is MJ, right? So, I guess he can do what he wants. But people don't like being around that. It's not an enjoyable thing. It's a total jerk. Okay, other virtues that can be seen there on the next few pages can be highlighted. I commend them to you on your own time. Justice, honesty, loyalty. One thing that I do want to highlight on page 217 just real quickly that's also a very attractive trait when exhibited in a leadership position is self-discipline. Okay, self-discipline is something that basically everyone desires to do and that everyone knows is really hard. And when we see leaders who manifest self-discipline, we want to be like them and to follow them. It's just a natural human tendency. Self-discipline is something that takes a long time to cultivate. I've been working on it for years in my life, and I wouldn't say I'm especially good at it. It can be something also that some people are good at in some areas of their lives, but really bad at in others. Maybe they're great at disciplining their eating habits, but their sleeping habits are out of control. Okay, or they work really hard, but their sexual life is out of control or something like that. But when we see self-discipline, it gives us the strength to try to similarly act. Ethics is a really contagious thing. And when some people are behaving well and making good choices and making self-disciplined choices or honest choices or integrity-filled choices, others are inspired to do the same. But at the same time, bad ethics can also be contagious. And when somebody's cheating or somebody's manifesting a lack of self-discipline, laziness, idleness, or indolence or something like that, that can be contagious too, and the people around them can become infected by it. That's why it's always important to choose wisely who your friends are, because they rub off on us, and their traits become our own traits, even if we don't realize it over a period of time. Okay, I wanted to move through that chapter pretty quickly because we're still behind it. I'm trying to catch up. Are there any comments or thoughts about any of those virtues? Okay, let us move on then. And I want to go to page 224 and see if we can make a little bit of headway on this chapter. I think we're going to end today probably with the Boeing case, so let's just go ahead and take a look at that. So someone tell us what was going on in the Boeing case. You guys remember from your reading, this is a little more recent than the Kozlowski case. What was going on in the Boeing case? So there's the CEO dude, Stone Cipher, yes? He's trying to repair the company's image, yes? And what happens? Bottom of 225. Had an affair, thank you. Progress was going well, but an unexpected episode brought about a new scandal, although one quite different from the previous cases. Stone Cipher, a married man, had an affair with Deborah Peabody, 48 years old, who was vice president of Boeing. Matters came to a head in March 2005 when, for the biannual meeting of the board of Boeing directors, which took place in Washington, Stone Cipher used company funds and a company jet for Ms. Peabody. Okay, I suspect that people's responses to this particular case and these actions of the CEO might fall into a couple or three different categories. Okay, so I suspect that some of us in this room would say the fact of the affair disqualifies him as CEO. Okay, he has an affair with a company employee. This is a conflict of interest. It undermines his ability to be the CEO. And it undermines his ability to lead with integrity and truthfulness, because by its nature, an affair is a lie to his spouse. And this is something that other employees are going to see and recognize as being inconsistent with the stances he ought to be taking as CEO. I suspect, though, that some of us would say in this room, it doesn't disqualify him to be CEO. The reason why is these are his personal matters. This is his personal life, his sexual life, and it's different than his professional life, people might say, and so it's not something that ought to be seen as undermining his ability to do his job. He can still do his job even after having had an affair with a company employee. Okay, and maybe some people are in the middle. Some people might say, well, it's bad that he had an affair, but he really only crossed the line when he used company goods like the jet to fly Peabody around as his affair partner. This is Peabody. So it was the using company funds that actually would disqualify him, not the affair as such. Some people might say that. That's kind of a middle-of-the-road position. What do people think? Maybe I could hear, we've only got a couple minutes here, but maybe I could hear first from those who think that the affair with the employee, the company employee, she was a vice president at the time, undermines Sono Cypher's ability to do his job and undermines his status as CEO. Does anybody want to defend that position? Should he be disqualified as CEO by virtue of an affair with a company employee? Yes. Okay. Sure.
And so it's like not showing loyalty to his own life. So what makes you think that he's going to be loyal to a company if he's using and he's having an affair and he's using the company's money for his own personal use?
Okay, sure. So a couple different grounds for making the case. One is the fact of the deception, which conveys a spirit of deception, and it's hard to lead as a CEO when you do that sort of thing. And the other aspect of Maria's case is that this is a company that's hierarchical, like all companies, and when sexual dynamics are introduced into a power hierarchy, this alters the nature of the hierarchy in a way that's unfair to other employees, in a way that harms the ability of the CEO to be impartial and to do his job in fairness to all employees, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? Maybe I could hear from somebody articulating the other side of the case. Even if you don't believe it, maybe you could articulate it. Could someone make the case that this is his personal life, and what he does in his sexual life does not disqualify him for his job as CEO? Okay, go for it. Go for it.
I would say that his affair disqualified him as a husband in his marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't necessarily say that he was not supposed to still be very single. And I would say there's a different things. His ability to work and his ability to do things.
Good. Okay, because the roles are different, and this is something that he could potentially do as CEO while still continuing to provide the company with dynamic leadership and promoting product development, et cetera. Okay. Actually, this very situation is one that the United States had to work through in the 1990s with Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky. It's basically precisely this setup. And the question was, does this disqualify Clinton for the job? Is this something that undermines his ability to do his job? And it kind of came out during that. I mean, I don't want to be too explicit, but it's kind of hard to convey the point without being a little explicit. Like at one point, he was on the phone in the Oval Office in the White House, you know, ordering troops into battle while providing her with oral sex, right? I mean, that's going to undermine his ability to exercise good judgment, I would think, at the very least. On other occasions, he made state leaders from other countries wait an hour or more longer for their appointments with him because he was doing his thing with Lewinsky. So I think that there is a case to be made that the loss of integrity and respect is sufficient to undermine the CEO here. But the case is very much strengthened, I think. I think we could all agree with that. The case is very much strengthened if he starts actively being unable to do his job by virtue of the affair. Like flying Peabody around in his jet where he's using company resources for personal use. And he's crossed over from being an impartial leader of the whole company. Okay, so some would argue that the affair itself is disqualifying. I'm actually among them. I think the affair does disqualify him. The affair with a company employee. I don't know if an affair outside of the company would have disqualified him. In fact, I think not. But others would say the case is only strengthened to the point of disqualification when he starts using company funds or actively becomes unable to do his job. Okay, that's discussion for another day, though, and do watch the video from Wednesday as I talk about some of the rest of this chapter. Thank you for your attention, and I will see you guys after the break. Yes?
What day is the paper due?
The paper, I don't remember the exact day, but it is in April. Isn't it? Or is it the end of March? April 6th. I thought it was the last week of March, first week of April. April 6th, yeah. Okay. Good deal.